Hey people, welcome to the Run Testers. We're here today to talk to you about this. This is the Polar Grit X. Now, Nick, Mike and myself have been using this as much as possible in lockdown. We're separated around the country here in the UK, but we've also just used Zoom as best we could to bring you our first impressions of this brand new watch. So here's what we made of it. So after playing with the Grit X for a little while, what are your guys' take on design? Nick, what do you make of it so far?
So I think the design doesn't quite live up to the renders we saw when it launched. I think it's still very much a sports watch. It doesn't really come across as that kind of premium build that you get from like a Fenix. But it's a pretty solid sports watch. It's quite bulky. I kind of view it as like a Forerunner 945, but a little bit less sleek. It's a bit kind of bulkier, sits a bit bigger on the wrist. The touchscreen I still don't like. Didn't like it on the Vantage. I think it's laggy. It doesn't really respond to our touches, so I just use the buttons, which are really a lot better on this than they were on the Vantage V.
I kind of think they probably didn't need to have the touchscreen on there. I do find I use it, and I use it for specific things, kind of launching or expanding on things like the activity tracking, so you get a percentage, but I kind of want to see the breakdown. And I'm there and I find myself tapping, and it's like, it's just when you're used to using a smartwatch and you've been told you've got a touchscreen there, I'm used to kind of it just working, and you don't really get that. So I would have preferred if they just stuck to buttons, and I would have been absolutely fine. I think most people would be fine with that as well.
Yeah, 100%. Get rid of it. It's a sports watch. Doesn't need it. And if it's going to be there, it needs to be good.
I think, yeah, it's not an outdoor watch in the kind of traditional sense. I mean, when we found out about it a week before, I kind of was expecting to see something a bit more in what we've seen, like the Fenix and the Sunto, that kind of bigger kind of casing. And I'm not saying that it's not going to be durable or robust or anything like that, but it just doesn't give you that impression. Like you said, I mean, for my first impression, it looked a bit like a Forerunner, and it feels like that on your wrist as opposed to something like a Vantage V. I mean, I definitely agree the buttons, the different buttons, the kind of texture, kind of grippier buttons that we've got on the Grit X are much better than what we had on the Vantage V.
So in that sense, I guess, we were all expecting this to be like a big play for the ultra adventure trail run. That's kind of how it was posed to us. And I think we're all sort of in agreement that it doesn't quite sort of feel like that super rugged. It's not got the heft of a Sunto. It doesn't feel sort of ruggedized in that way. But I'm with you. I think the controls are better than the Vantage V. I think it's perfectly comfortable. I've worn it in conjunction with the Fenix 6, and I haven't really felt different about either of them. If anything, I get a little bit more of the silicone band burn from the Fenix 6 than I have with this strap. I have had one different experience than you guys, which is first time I tried to take it off, the clasp snapped, and it shored, the metal clasp got a very thin pin, and it shored right through the rubber grips that hold it. And I've had to improvise with a different replaceable strap. Luckily, the straps are easy to replace, but that's one durability thing that's happened to me. I don't know whether that'll be an anomaly, but it did happen to me without putting too much sort of pressure on it. So let's get on to battery life. The battery life, the big claims that we got when the watch was launched was 40 hours of GPS battery life and then 7 days general usage. The 40 hours was extendable to 100 with some kind of power saving modes on. How have you guys found it so far? Mike, let's start with you.
So this has been interesting. I think we've already, between us, spoke about this. What I found is that for kind of sports tracking, and when I've been using those sensors and to go and run stuff, the drop off of battery is very small, which is great. So, I've done a run, and maybe done a 30-minute run, and it's been like a 1% off that's not a GPS, just a kind of a treadmill run, and it's been 1%. What I have found is that in between those times that I've not been tracking exercise or anything like that, it seems to be quite a big drop off in terms of that battery. Like I've noticed it after when I've got up in the morning and it's been sleep tracking. And there's definitely something, I don't know what it is, but there's definitely something not right in between when you're not actually using the sports kind of sensors.
Yeah, and I think it's really, really clearly illustrated that the kind of difference in the battery usage by the fact that me and Kieran have both had to charge after 4 days, and we couldn't have done more different kind of activities in that time. Right now I've got a little injury. I'm not really running much outside, so I'm doing a lot of indoor cycling. So I use the GPS for 10 minutes, and I still had to charge it after 4 days because the drop off between activities is so high. Whereas Kieran, what did you do?
So I actually went out and I put a lot of the ultra skills the test was going to come onto, and I did a 9.25 hour, 45-mile run with full GPS on, And weirdly, I had it was the same 4 days from off the charger back onto the charger. So we've done completely opposite. And it feels very strange that the GPS hasn't really taken a bite out of it in that way, or at least the functions that have been used in between have, if you want to put it the other way.
So it's touted 7 days, kind of in the kind of smartwatch mode, and or the watch mode, and generally using all the features. I mean, I found I've got about 4 days before I've had to charge it without heavy intensive. I don't feel heavy intensive kind of sports tracking, and you guys have got the same basically. It's like 4 days, right?
Yeah, but I think to put it into context though, the Garmin Fenix 6 Pro that I put it up against pretty much had the same. It was tracking about 10% slower in terms of burn rate, doing exactly the same things. And in reality, the Fenix 6 had to go on the charge almost at the same time anyway. So in real usage, it hasn't really changed that experience for me between those two watches. I will have to charge both of them roughly at the same time.
I think it's got a lot of pretty cool features that are like in between runs, and they're clearly, I think, killing the battery. Things like the recovery stuff, the sleep stuff, and that's fine. It's just, I think, when you see that 40-hour headline figure, you maybe think, well, that's the same as a Fenix or a Coros, and those watches last a lot. Well, the Coros in particular just does no battery loss between activities, whereas the Polar is doing a lot for that time.
And there are power saving modes on the Gritex as well for certain tracking stuff, which I haven't really had to kind of delve into yet. But I've always found that kind of, especially at those lower battery levels, when kind of Garmin or maybe even Coros as well, they kind of hold quite well on those low battery levels and still allowing you to do something. Whereas with the Polar, I was getting, when it was running low, it was constantly like, the battery's low, you need to charge it. So it's little things like that. I think ultimately, I think you can get those 7 days, but I think you really need to think about what you've got enabled, and is that a right thing that you have to be more playful with what you use to get that battery life.
All right, so the next big one, and this is another big kind of headline feature that they Polar kind of launched, was Fuelwise. And the claim here is that it will help you manage your fueling and go beyond a kind of set an alert every 20 minutes to tell you when to eat, and be tied to heart rate and work rate, and give you more personal, individual guided recommendations based on the intensity of your effort, when to eat and how much to eat. And I did a big test with this. I went out and did that ultra, and I went through the whole process of setting up I put in a 10-hour run. I said that my carbs portions would be 20 grams per portion, and I said my intensity would roughly be about heart rate zone 3, because you choose which heart rate zone you think you're going to work in, and then it gives you an estimate. So it estimated that I would need 440 grams of carbs in those 10 hours, and that's 22 sets at 20 grams, and it gives you that. And then what I thought we might get with this would be something that was quite kind of blunt. It would just then tell you every 20 minutes or every half an hour to eat. And it didn't actually. It was really quite good. The duration between each of my feeds, if you want to call them that, changed. And that's it was a good thing. And it seemed to match actually some of the intensity. So a good example is, halfway into it, I'd done a marathon. I came into my house base station, and I had my watch still running, and I didn't eat. So there was a big period where I wasn't really moving and doing very much. And the length of time between fueling, it picked that up, and it didn't just give me another fueling moment whilst I was in the house. So that was all good. So it does seem to be adjusting to what you're doing. Thumbs up. There's a few open goals here that they've missed though. It doesn't make you acknowledge when you've eaten. And the vibrations and the alerts are pretty much the same as you'll get from a split. So sometimes it's very easy, if you've gone deep into an ultra when you've lost your head, to miss a feed, and you can't see anywhere on the watch how many feeds you've had. You haven't acknowledged them. So actually it's possible to miss feeds. And I would really like them just to have a little screen on the watch that says the number of feeds you've acknowledged, and at the end of your run to be able to go into Polar Flow or on the watch and see actually when and where you ate. And it would be a really good thing for knocking you onto your next run to see that you're optimizing your fueling. But overall, I think it's a really good feature.
We had that kind of breakdown from Polar when they were giving us the briefing about it. I think this was the one feature for me. I was like, okay, this is something really interesting, because this is something I think a lot of people would want. I think, we've talked about for years about kind of fueling and this kind of hydration and kind of bringing this into your training, and it's very difficult to do. Normally it's kind of alerts, like Coros do alerts, and I think it's more in kind of the cycling space for Garmin really in terms of that stuff. So it's good to see it. I have a very specific kind of fueling plan in races, and I think if I can set that up with the Grit X, I think it will ensure that I stick to that kind of rigid plan. And I think in a race environment it could be kind of really useful.
People don't know how to fuel that well sometimes. I know people are really experienced runners running sub threes were still only taking a couple of gels and still kind of bonking in the end. I think this watch makes it really clear how much you burn in training runs, because afterwards it tells you what your energy sources have been, how much has come from fat, how much from carbs. I think it might be a bit eye-opening to people to see how much they're burning and maybe adjust their fuel strategy. And in training runs, you don't have those kind of mile markers reminding you have your watch going off, but you still need that kind of push, I think, to take the gels and stuff like that. I know so many people, including myself in marathons, who are hitting race pace, they go, I don't want to take a gel right now. I feel like I'm really smooth. I feel like I'm in the zone. I don't need one. And then a mile later, I knew I should have taken that gel. Having someone just telling you to do it, I think will be quite useful.
So the other thing I haven't said is it really helped me prepare my portions and work out. So I'm looking at the labels of things and working out what numbers of amounts of carbs I've got to have. But actually that translation from percentage of burn back into grams of actual fuel, and being able to somehow tally those two together, because you've got all the nutritional information on the backs of the packs, would be another step on, which would be very useful. Because although I said that I burnt sort of 43% carbs, 43% fat, I don't quite know what I took in and what I've burnt and now the protein, all of these kind of things to restock. It's a bit of a calculation at the end. The other thing I think that's interesting to talk about here is the hydration. And I know a lot of people, I saw a lot of negative comments about hydration. People will drink too much and get, hyponatremia and all this kind of stuff. And people need to use their brains in order to do it. The hydration is very simple. You tell it how often you would like to be reminded to drink, and then it reminds you. It's not getting under your skin and telling you whether or not you're hydrated. Nothing's that clever yet. There will be tech soon that can do that, but it's merely a reminder. And actually, again, in ultra world, that is a very useful thing. And I found it very useful just to give me a little nudge that I need to take a drink from my bottle, because you do get lazy, your head does go. You still have to use your brain, but I do think that's a nice little addition. So boys, right, heart rate. It's obviously a biggie. Accuracy of heart rate. Heart rate is powering a lot of the features on this watch, from recovery through to that Fuelwise that we've just spoken about. What have you found so far in heart rate, Mike?
Yeah, so I mean, I've done a fair amount of kind of tests on this. When I kind of do my kind of heart rate testing generally, I kind of keep it indoors on the treadmill, so I can kind of have the device. I can kind of quickly kind of see and glance at the data. So Polar's using the same heart rate tech that they introduced in the Vantage series, which is a good thing, because I've had some generally kind of good experiences with the watches and heart rate accuracy. What I found in kind of my first few runs, it's been generally good, but I think there's one kind of small issue, which is I'm getting these kind of randomly high spikes. It might just be one, but what that ultimately does is it skews the maximum heart rate recording. And the average generally seems to be fine. It always seems to be near the beginning. Generally seems to be near the beginning, and it's taken a while to get down to the chest strap. So I used it against a Polar H9, so one of Polar's heart rate monitors, and then it would even itself out. But then ultimately, at the end of the run, you're getting this data where the maximum heart rate is kind of well off. But generally, throughout the run, and it's been kind of steady, kind of tempo runs, it's been okay. But there's definitely something. I'm not quite sure what's causing that. There's definitely something there that's not quite right.
I went on a couple of short runs, like I say, for this injury, and I've done a lot of indoor cycling, and I've done some really short, sharp intervals to kind of see how it's tracking those spikes when I'm doing them deliberately. So I have had a couple of these spikes as well, Mike's mentioned. Generally, it's just a bit slower than a heart rate chest strap, as you'd expect from an optical monitor. So I'm doing a sharp interval of 30 seconds, it will rise too slowly and it'll come down too slowly, but it'll be about right, but it'll be about 3 or 4 seconds behind the heart rate chest strap. On the run, I found it was pretty close. 2 runs I've done it. Again, it maybe was slightly slower. As I went up a hill, it would catch up to the chest strap slowly and then maybe slowly come back down. But for me, it's better than the Vantage V, I think. I think with the Vantage V, I often found it just wouldn't track me once I hit the higher heart rate zones. It wouldn't be able to keep up. It would just kind of hover around too low a zone. Whereas with this has been more accurate for me. And I do think it's good enough to use for your training, I'd say. I would still use a chest strap. but I think it's been like when I was running today, with a Huawei smartwatch on, it was better than that.
And I think from my perspective, what's really interesting, when I did the Ultra, I used a chest strap paired with a Fenix 6, but I used Fuelwise based off the optical sensor. And so the results that I've had with Fuelwise using the heart rate seem to match how I felt in real life. So I guess that's a positive. So another big feature that Polar announced was Hill Splitter. And again, this was all angling towards the sort of adventure, ultra, trail sort of people. At least we felt that way, but we've had an interesting experience with it. I used it again during that big long run, and I felt it was quite laggy. It was definitely laggy to pick up the changes in incline and decline. And it seemed to, although my calves and my quads knew I was running up a hill a long time before the Grit X did, although when it finally flipped over to saying that I was running uphill, it had clocked longer distance. So it didn't start me halfway up the hill. It was clearly tracking. It just seemed to take a long time for the screen to pick it up. I just don't think there's very many useful metrics on the screen. So you get distance of this particular climb, you get speed. I can't quite tell whether or not that's your current speed or the average speed of that segment, which makes a big difference. You get the ascent and the descent for that sort of climb or drop, and you get the number of climbs that you've done. But in an ultra world, going to a mountain where there's lots of little rises and falls along with the very big ones that you do, by the time you get to, like, this is my 16th climb, it's a meaningless number. What I want to know is, how have I done? How many of the big climbs have I done? And it goes, okay, if I know that I've done 4 of the big climbs without having to look at the map on my shorts, that's a happy thing. But it doesn't do that, and I just feel like it's a very limited setup.
Yeah. So my real thoughts of this is, I thought this was going to be a great ultra feature, and actually I think it's a feature for someone like me who'd go and do hill reps on one hill on a Tuesday night, come back and they've been automatically tracked, and I can analyze the same kind of hill and look at it. Like I can look at it afterwards and it was automatically done it. It feels like you can get all this information by hitting the lap button at the start of the climb, and then when you go and hit your descent. Whereas actually Garmin have this Climb Pro feature, which is a lot more advanced, I think, and gives a lot more of what you were talking about, Kieran. Like, you do have to use a route with the Garmin, and then it analyzes the climbs on the whole route and tells you as you hit one, this climb is this meters long, this steep, you've got this much time remaining on it, we think, this is how long it is, and this is your 5th climb of 12, and you've got these coming up later. So I think that's a much more advanced feature, and what I would hope to see is Coros use their kind of route integration with this feature in time. So yeah, you go, you're on hill, at the bottom it says, doesn't just say hill 1, it says hill 1 of 12, and if you can scroll through them maybe even and see what you've got to come, because right now this looks great if you're running at one particular hill, when you come back and it's automatically been divided up. That's pretty clever, but it's, again, like I say, it's a road runner feature, not an ultra runner feature, I don't think.
One thing I wanted to tell me was, on that segment, I wanted to see how my heart rate average was on that segment. How hard am I working on this climb, so that I can see, am I overdoing it, am I overcooking it? I mean, I know you can look down at your heart rate, but if a climb is 3 hours long, that can vary, and you want to be able to see on this segment, am I killing myself this climb? Should I ease back? Should I go on? It doesn't do it.
It feels very passive as a feature, whereas Climb Pro is very active, and I think it will become more active in time.
So we've basically got Komoot on there as well, so a route planning feature. Nick, give us your thoughts on Komoot quickly.
So Polar have kind of outsourced the kind of route planning features on the Grit X to Komoot, which is a very popular app. So you basically got to set up a Komoot account and link it to Polar. I hope I'm saying Komoot right. It could be Commute. I don't know. You have to do this on the Polar website. It's a little bit of a faff. I think we all thought it was a bit of a faff, and we were all a little bit disappointed to find that if you want to use these routes, you might have to pay. You get one area free on Komoot, which is your local area. But if you want a new area, it's £3.99. If you want a new region, it's £8. And if you want like a whole new, if you want to unlock the world, it's £30 now. It's not a huge amount of money, but this is an expensive watch. It's a watch billed as an outdoor watch. And if you want route planning features around the world and you're going to go run these long ultras, you're going to have to pay extra for them, and then have to go outside the Polar app to set up the routes to get. And again, it's not full maps. It's turn-by-turn navigation using a breadcrumb trail. So I don't know, it could be better. I mean, it falls well short of what's on the Fenix, obviously, but that's much pricier. But it also doesn't really seem to impress me a lot more than the basic breadcrumb navigation on watches that cost £250, and you've still got to go and faff around with a separate app and potentially pay for new areas. So yeah, I wasn't impressed by this.
My take, I think that the Garmin map creation is equally as complicated as Komoot. I think that none of these map creation tools I find very easy. I did like in Komoot that you get an insight into the breakdown of the terrain that you're going to face. That's pretty good. If you're going to go and do something quite unknown, you can see how much of the time you're going to be spending running on road or gravel or whatever, and that's quite useful if it's accurate.
This was the only feature I actually had to look a tutorial video on Polar's app to work out how to do it. That's how much of a faff it kind of was. And it's a shame. I wish they kind of maybe offered a subscription just to kind of, I'm not expecting them to give it away for free, but if they give you an essence of how good which I think the service is good, and you could use it and get full use out of what it's capable of, I think that would have been a really nice thing for Polar and Komoot to kind of come together and do. So it's a shame there isn't kind of that option to do that out of the box, basically.
By the way, one of you will probably do this, viewers, but can someone please just correct us on how to say it in the comments below?
Komoot.
I'm going to Komoot. Komoot?
We haven't bothered to find out. Right, final bit, boys, and this is a funny steps. No one's buying this to be a step counter, but we have found some weirdness with the steps.
I've just got no idea what's going on here because, like I say it again, I'm injured. So right now, and I'm injured, I'm in lockdown. So my movement is basically the walk to my garage to get on my indoor bike most of the time, and occasionally like a 10-minute run. So the first 4 days I had this watch, I did 1 run, and I did lots of indoor cycling. I did no walking, and I didn't have a step count lower than 17,000 on any one of those days. One day it was 25,000, and I had another step tracker on which said like 3,000. It was 10 times the amount basically, and and I've got no idea where this is coming from. There has been an update today that it might be fixed now, but utterly bizarre.
Your home smart cam just shows you walking to and from the fridge, mate.
I will say as well, obviously, we have our Run Testers WhatsApp group where, we're talking about these watches all the time. This has been a hot topic. I've had the same thing where it seems to have been 2,000 steps over, and I haven't really, we're in lockdown. I haven't really been able to go anywhere most days. So it's a weird quirk. It seems to have evened out a little bit for me, but it's an odd one. If you care about steps, we're getting a weird experience, I think, all 3 of us. So
all right, guys. Well, that's that. Everyone, that is our lockdown run through of the Grit X, of our first impressions. Big caveat to all of this: we've still got a lot more testing to do, and we're going to basically be doing our full review to follow. But we wanted to share what we'd found so far, because essentially we've been doing it on WhatsApp, and we thought you guys should hear it and all. So thanks for watching.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.